The broadcast is now starting. All attendees are in listen-only mode.
Good morning, it's Jim Vanderwall with Fraser Basin Council. Thanks to everyone who's signed into our webinar this morning so far. We're going to get started in a couple of minutes. It's just after 11 o'clock, so just stand by. You should be seeing the beginning of the PowerPoint presentation for our webinar today on the BC First Nations New Housing Guide. If you're having any difficulties with audio, well, you probably can't hear me, but if you're having any difficulties with the quality of the audio, you can also try the phone number, which is at the bottom of the screen. If your computer audio is giving you any trouble, sometimes with poor internet connection, that can be an issue. There's a 1-800 number there for you to use. We'll get started in a couple of minutes here. Good morning, it's Jim Vanderwall with the Fraser Basin Council. Thanks for joining us this morning for our First Nations Home Energy Save webinar. The topic that we've got today is BC First Nations New Housing Guide. We're pleased to have a speaker to talk to you today about this, and most importantly, we're looking for some, or she is looking for some feedback and suggestions from the group. Hopefully you're able to see and hear the webinar. If you have any technical issues, you can get in touch with my colleague Elena Chia through our email, fraserbasin@gmail.com. You can see the audio connection there as well, either through your computer or through our 1-800 number, if that's not working for you. So First Nations Home Energy Save is an initiative that FBC has been coordinating for a couple of years now, working with First Nations communities and supported organizations to try and advance energy efficiency and in homes on reserve and First Nations, and both to reduce energy use, but also to build local capacity and opportunities for communities to improve housing stock, improve opportunities for employment. And we do that through things like today's event, try to share stories between communities, offer learning. And just wanted to thank the funders of this initiative, which include the Real Estate Foundation of BC, BC Housing, BC Ministry of Energy and Mines, and BC Hydro, among others. There's also a number of resources that we've got online. If you go to fnenergy.ca, you can subscribe to the email list, see recordings of past webinars on different topics that we've hosted, and we try to highlight different community success stories that we become aware of, or other opportunities where there's funding or support available. As I mentioned earlier, we're just on the technical side of the webinar. Your audio is going to be muted so that we can hear the speaker. You'll have an opportunity to ask questions. We have lots of questions later on. And if you have any technical difficulties, again, my colleague Elena's email, fraserbasin@gmail.com. So today's speaker is Gillian Aubie. Gillian provides facilitation coordination for the Great Bear Initiative's Energy Committee through her company Pinna Sustainability, and she'll tell you a bit more about that, as well as the Coastal First Nation Housing Guide that this initiative is building on. Before I hand things over to her, I'm just going to launch a little poll here, because it's quite helpful for us to know who's joining us today. So if you could just let us know what type of organization that you're with, that would be quite helpful. Okay, so I'm just going to close the poll and share the results. So you can see there's kind of almost an even split between First Nations administration, consulting, local or regional government, which I think is mostly provincial, and non-government organizations. So great to see the mix of folks involved here. So what I'm going to do now is just bear with us for one moment while we just transition over to Gillian. And
hello.
Here we go. You should have control here in a second, Jill.
Okay. And let me know if you see my presentation.
Looks great.
Okay. Do you see the GoToWebinar control panel?
Nope.
Okay, great. Technology sorted itself out. Okay, so thank you very much for the introduction, Jim. We're happy to be presenting to the group today. We're presenting on some past work that we've completed with Coastal First Nations and some future work that is just in process. So I'm excited to see the split of folks. I know many of you have been involved in this work to date and are already in line to be involved with some of the work that's ongoing. So I look forward to continue to work with many of you on the phone already on this initiative. So really, we're here today. The purpose of today's presentation, I was invited by Jim and Elena to share work completed on the new housing guide that we've been doing with the Coastal First Nations, and also to gain some input to tell folks about new work that's coming to expand this Coastal First Nations guide to be more a province-wide guide, and to gain input from everyone here on that guide. So in terms of agenda, what we'll be doing today, or in this little hour, we'll give you an overview of the new housing guide, talk about the current leadership that's happening around the province around new building. We're going to talk about this provincial initiative that we're creating, and then have a bit of a discussion to get some feedback. So I just wanted to back it up. Some of you may have seen these next two slides before, but in the beginning, so in the end of 2015, beginning of 2016, in my capacity as the energy facilitator at Coastal First Nations, a group of the communities that I work with asked for some input. So there was a growing interest in new homes coming. Of course, I've been working in energy efficiency with the communities for some time previously, and so rather than looking at generating, we started focusing on energy efficiency in existing homes, and then new homes started becoming more interesting to folks. So we started talking more about new homes. People were hearing about energy efficient homes. They're hearing about passive houses and net zero, and starting to hear about energy step code. And there are lots of questions about how does this apply to reserve. And a lot of people were also approaching communities with ideas, technologies, solutions, and there was a lot of questions about what's the best solution for my community, and who do I trust, and who do I know, and who's this guy and who's that person. So lots of questions about uncertainty for next steps. And the communities really asked for a roadmap, like, can you help make some decisions about how to move forward on housing? So, and they had lots of questions. They wanted to know things about, why modular versus stick. Someone wants to put a modular house in, but why? Is that a good thing? Is there a bad thing? What kind of energy guidelines should be using? What does better than code mean as people talk about that? How do we make sure to take advantage of our local economy and our local workers and training while we invest so much resources into new housing? All these sorts of questions. How well should they perform, our new houses? Has it been done before? How much does it cost was always a big question. And really, who can we trust? So this is just a sample of the kind of questions that were running through people's minds. And I wonder, for those in the community, if you can relate to this at all. Just one moment. Jeez. Sorry about that. And so from there, communities were really asking for a guide, a tool to guide leadership towards securing more resilient, appropriate housing in their communities. So the overview of where did we come? So that started in the beginning of 2016. By 2017, we developed the guide. There's a picture of it there in the picture, and there's also a handout attached to your to the web portal that you can download it if you'd like. It was, as I said, developed in response to the coastal housing needs, and it really recognized, we worked hard to recognize similarities in our region, but differences within communities. So it's not one guide for everyone how to build a new house. It's I think of it more as a considerations guide that people can weigh through and work through as they're trying to make the best choices in their communities. And a really key message that came out of this work is that we want our homes to reflect our culture. We want our homes to use local resources and employ local folks as much as possible. Community by community that's dependent. We want to reduce fossil fuel, and also we want to use housing as a way to foster pride in our homes and healing from past situations. So this was some messages that really came through. So what are some of the lessons that came out of this work? We can talk about, I guess if people want to talk in more detail, they can put their hand up and let Jim know, but I'll run through this so we can have some discussion at the end. So lessons around designing homes for the coast. We learned some things about energy efficiency and the role and benefit of an energy advisor. So for those of you who are flipping through the document as you go, you can see that we talk about what does energy efficiency mean on the coast, and how do we reflect our local culture as we're building an energy efficient home on the coast. There's a lot of considerations around climate. I know in the coastal climate is different than the rest of the province. There's driving rain, there's a lot of moisture in the air, and also our culture. There's a lot of, processing fish and food in our homes and in our communities. So how do we build houses to accommodate that level of moisture in our homes? There's also cost considerations that we need to think about. If we can source things locally, potentially that could reduce costs and create an economic engine. We have to consider long-term performance, which is sometimes more costly, rather than shorter-term, less expensive, but we'd have to repair it more quickly. And also we talked a lot about standardizing materials. And an example of that, just to give a specific example, is in windows. We talked about how we're designing houses that all the windows are the same size. And so if one breaks, you can replace it rather than having 10 different sizes of windows in the community and having to backstock, 10 different sizes in the warehouse. So just some simple design considerations that will help with cost as well as climate and culture. There was a big conversation around prefab versus stick. And of course, stick build is when you build a house from the ground up, and prefab is when the major wall panels or, from major wall panels right to the whole house, if it's a tiny house or a small house, can be built in a factory and shipped to community. This came up mainly because not every community has a local workforce that can be trained and brought up to speed. And some prefab builders can work with, I'm sure many of you on the phone can work with local folks as well. But if a community like this is the New Hawk Nation really want to lean in and train 30 workers to build houses for the next 20 years plus, then that's a different scenario than that's more of a stick build consideration unless they're running their own prefab facility. So these sort of conversations came through, and we really boiled down to the ability to use local resources that defines people's approach if they're wanting a stick build or a prefab approach. We're remembering that this is a remote location, so there's risks with prefab and shipping and storage and without proper warehousing facilities and all that sort of stuff. Local employment was a consideration as well. The ability to train and heal is part of the mentorship process, which happens with longer building projects, and the ability to be flexible on site, timing and costs as well. So if you're looking for something quick to go up, that may be more of a prefab, but if you have more time, then stick build may be a consideration. And the cost would vary depending on location, remembering that this again is a very remote community. These are remote communities, and many of them you need to take barges to and fly stuff in. If you're missing screws, you'll need to get them in on the next plane. So all of these considerations come into play as we're deciding between stick build or prefab homes. Another group of lessons was around policy and construction management. Strong policy during procurement will help the project be successful. So stating performance right up in the front with contracts, knowing how you're going to measure performance to the policy in the contract, and holding contracts accountable throughout the process. In order to hold contractors, builders accountable, we'll need some skills for measuring performance. So a lot of work on blower door testing as one, on building inspector training, with these sort of skills that are needed in community to hold contractors visiting their community accountable. And also questions about how do you go about selecting contractors in the coastal First Nations. Demonstrated skills in working in remote communities is essential because the game changes. And as anyone who knows worked in remote communities, you need to be, project management has to be dialed up even that much more because of the remote nature. Lessons around technical considerations. We started getting into technical considerations, and as many of you know, it could be there's a lot of technical components to a house. And so at this level, the guide gives questions to ask to start you on a path, and then we're also creating a compendium document that's just in review now with building science experts around. It's almost a choose your own adventures checklist around, what are your site conditions, what is your geography, what's your heat source, or what's your energy source in your community, to start to make some of the technical considerations. But at a high level, we're looking at site conditions, climate, and culture. We're looking at energy costs, GHG impacts. If we're able to use on-site renewables, what's applicable, and then with some of those inputs, we look that informs the technical considerations. One thing I think is useful to bring up that was a big learning for me as we go through, but there was a divide between remote considerations and southern perspectives. And what that means is, in the south, the whole performance-based approach to housing, where we button it up as tight as we can and stick in an HRV and mechanically ventilate the homes, wasn't working on the coast for a few of the cultural and climatic reasons that we were talking about earlier. And that was a big rub in terms of what works in Vancouver, not necessarily working on the coast. And so there was a lot of discussion around passive ventilation versus mechanical ventilation, and how do you train people to open windows when appropriate. So there was kind of a divide between some of the more mainstream southern notions around what energy efficiency means, and what works on reserve. And one example here is the HRV. It captures heat from outgoing warm air. It can recover 60 to 90% of the heat from a house as it goes, and it can improve energy efficiency by 50 to 70%. So that sounds great. But one of the problems that we see is when you're in a remote area with a community that runs their own electricity system, or is in an NIA, a non-integrated area of BC Hydro, that experiences electrical surges, these examples can burn, these appliances can burn out with a power surge, and then you've got additional maintenance and repair, and then you're left remote with a machine that's non-functioning and not giving you the efficiency you need. So there's been a lot of thought into a lot of discussion into how do you balance these two, and that has all gone into the design of the homes that we've been working on. And lastly, lessons on preparing your community. If you want to create a more of an intensive training around stick building your community, you need to make sure you have champions and people on the ground. So that's one part of it. And so is your band prepared? What are your requirements? The band also needs to know what they're asking for. What is a better than building code home mean in your consideration? Are you aligning with step code, with the BC Energy step code, or are you using other ranking systems? So really defining that. Your band needs to understand if you have the skills to hold your contractors accountable to the parameters that you put in your contract. And if you have the skills to maintain and service new homes, like the HRV example we were just talking about. also, occupants need to be prepared for the homes, sharing the story of why you're building homes and the process of what's gone into it. And so I'm curious, if we were all in a room together, I'd look at your faces and see community members, community representatives likely nod and say, yeah, people love it when we build highly efficient homes, better than it's built in other communities, and we feel proud of that, and it makes us want to take care of our homes more, and we feel more engaged in our well-being in the home. Also, it's important to enable end users to understand how to use their homes, and that way they can maintain their home, and that really changes the housing dynamic on Reserve. From Ban takes care of my home to I take care of my home. And so this is part of the transition that we're seeing on the coast. So in summary, through this process, we've really learned it's important to involve occupants in the design process, design homes for the climate and for our cultural practices. Again, people need to be involved in the process right the way through so they feel ownership and pride in the homes. And if that can be through building it, or if that's through the designing it, or picking colors, whatever it is, people need to be involved. We need to provide information on energy efficiency so they can understand and respect the features of their home that are energy efficient. And really, it's an opportunity to increase community and trades capacity. So really building on this influx of resources to the community, trying to make as much local benefit as possible. And generally, simpler is better is something we learned as well. So if you can make it simple, it's probably going to be easier to maintain into the future. As I've mentioned, there's a couple of new tools. That was the first package, the first deliverable. I also the first thing that communities wanted for. And from that, we're starting to, the New Hawk Nation, as many of you know, have been taking this to another level and have been really pushing on the stick build for energy efficient homes. And so out of that work, we're working on a visual construction guide that reflects the specifications, the building specifications that they're using in the New Hawk Nation. So specifications that consider culture, that consider climate, that are simple and straightforward, that consider community engagement. We're also, as I mentioned, working on this technical bulletin to support all aspects of coastal building. So helping folks decide on what kind of foundation is appropriate, decide on the heating system, windows, all these sorts of things. We're also working on some videos with the New Hawk on training on how to build to the specification that's coming out. So it's a film series on, how do you build corners that can withstand driving rain? How do you build a house and make sure that moisture isn't entering the walls and the corners, or what kind of materials do you use in bathrooms to make sure to control moisture? We're also planning on making films for occupants before they move into the home. And we're also working on business tools to help bands manage the construction process. So if you want to replicate some of the great work that's been happening with the New Hawk Nation, as an example, or other communities, you can have some business processes that we can transport or make templates to be shareable. There's some emerging tools. And I want to just point out, so this is what's been going on the coast, but this is just some of the many projects that have been happening around the province. So since we started this in late 2015, early 2016, many of you know, and many of you are leading the push towards better homes on Reserve. And these are just some of the examples, and there's more. And so when we were thinking about what's next? So this is great that we've been doing this work at the coast, and there's pockets of innovation all around the province. We wanted to think about how do we move the whole province forward? How do we make this work applicable province-wide? And so here's how do we improve new homes on Reserve across the province, not just focus the resources on the coastal First Nations. So the idea is to bring together lessons from the work that I've just talked about. Also, other innovative communities around the province that have been doing, like the case studies we just talked about. Other concurrent initiatives going on in OBC Housing is doing research, and other agencies are doing research, and industry, of course, is pushing ahead as well. So how do we take all of this together and conceive what a province-wide initiative would look like? So in 2017, at the First Nations Home Energy Save Conference in Vernon, I presented before our new housing guide was totally complete. I presented on where it was going, and there was a lot of interest at that workshop, and some of you might have been there, on what would a province-wide initiative look like. So we were building on that as well. What we heard in Vernon back in February, we had a fact-finding mission and an exercise to hear from folks what they would like in the initiative, and it was just a first step. And I said we would come back and report back on next steps. So what we heard in Vernon was the desire to develop regionally appropriate technical resources. So what we've been working on the coast reflects coastal environment and culture. So we would like some more resources in looking at in different regions of our project, of our province, what would that look like? Also some work on streamlining funding and financing processes, because anyone who works to fund new homes knows that it's a bit of a delicate exercise. Square peg in a round hole sometimes. So some work on that. Increasing capacity through improved training programs to make sure that as much as possible local champions and local workers can be involved in creating solutions for their communities. This matches with supporting engaged communities to lead from within. So as much as possible, foster local leadership, because when folks there are driving change, then more on the ground, and the opportunity for success is obviously stronger. There's, like what is happening province-wide with the energy step code work, there's an acknowledgement that we need awareness of energy efficiency across the trades and with various builders, and policy support to help drive and manage the procurement of new homes. Also, there was talk about a clearinghouse where we can access resources in a central location and explore how agencies can work more closely together and collaborate to improve. So that's some of the initial things that we've heard from Vernon in the Vernon conference. And with that, where am I here? So with that, what's happened is right now, BC Hydro has supported a scoping process to look at what would for a province-wide First Nations new housing guide or resource package look like. And so we're just spending a little bit of time right now to try to conceive of what the scope of a project like that would look like. And so what that entails is we've invited any First Nation housing representative who works for the band or for the tribal council and is interested in housing or has ideas to join what we're calling a steering committee for the time being, to start to form what the work plan, what do you want this deliverable to look like? What do you want the outcome to be at the end of the day? And then inform the work plan of how would we get there. So that's so I'd like to thank BC Hydro for funding the scoping exercise we're embarking on just now. If any First Nations housing representatives on the call want to be part of that, my name and contact at the end of the slide, and I'll talk again for that. And so I figured when I was asked to speak about the work we've been doing on the coast, it would be a great opportunity with folks around of the province today to ask some initial questions, which will help that scoping. So with that, I think, Jim, do you have some questions? You have two questions, I think, that we could do a vote on, and then I've got some discussion questions to lead through, and then just open conversation as well.
Yeah, sounds good. So first question here, just a little poll to get things started, is are you currently working on new housing initiatives in your community? I'll just close that one to see the results. And
Great.
Yes, not surprisingly, yes, lots of people are. And I guess the next one, just leading into some of your first questions, Gillian, would be, is energy efficiency a priority in your community? Okay, great. Thanks for input. So we'll just share those results as well. And again, not surprisingly, a lot of people have indicated that, yes, it's a high priority, and for others, it's somewhat a priority. So yes, that makes sense for folks who are interested in attending a webinar like ours today. So.
Okay. So for those who said that energy efficiency is a priority in your community, I'm wondering why. What is it that makes it? I know that on the coast where I've been working, it's mostly because we're remote and therefore not part of the integrated grid, which is powered by hydroelectricity. And where we are powered on hydroelectricity, we're on energy islands. So there's the desire to conserve is high because there's limited supply. So I'm wondering in others, what's been some of the drivers for your focus on energy efficiency? I don't know how we do this, Jim. Can you open it up, or do people type? Or
I guess the best thing to do, there's probably too many people to just have everyone talking. So if someone wants to address a question, you could either type your response or your ideas into the question box, or just let me know by typing in that you want to speak, and we can also unmute you. And Gillian, for some reason, your screen's gone out of full screen mode as well, but
okay, there we go.
Yeah. I just thought maybe since we've got a bit of a lull here, as people think about this question, there were a few comments or ideas that people had asked already. Maybe we can kind of go through a little bit of that while we're thinking about this question. So one, I guess, kind of linkage maybe that might be helpful here. One is Leo Lawson with Guasala and Aqueducts has mentioned that they're working on a housing project manual for new housing and renovations that they hope to be able to share with other First Nations in late February 2018. So I guess it's another coastal community, but different environment and not quite as remote as some of the folks that you're working with right now, Gillian. So
great. Yes, and Leo is on our steering committee, so I'm very happy to have met you already in the process.
There we go. I
wonder how similar and different they are.
Yeah, so we'll find out. Tom Laviolette has indicated that lower hydro costs for the household or the band are important in terms of priority for energy efficiency in their community in Lilwat.
That makes sense. Yeah, that makes sense. That's what I would imagine, that the cost is the main driver. I wonder for those who aren't, where energy efficiency isn't a priority, if anyone has any reflections on why not. Is cost not driving it to be a priority, or is there a different situation in your region of the province that makes it not a priority?
Yeah. A couple other suggestions here from Cheyenne Hood, who says energy efficiency is important for a number of reasons. Not only is it cost effective, because when you take into consideration people are living on very limited budgets, you affect all aspects of their lives by reducing energy and heating costs. And Jolene Turbasket says that our band members are coming forward and requesting energy efficient housing to reduce their electrical bills and also to be more environmentally friendly.
Great. Bills and environment. Yeah, and that's often a shared theme on reserve, that our First Nation communities live much more closely to the environment than many of our non-Indigenous communities, and it often comes out as a strong value in addition to cost. So that aligns with the coast as well. Thank you. Let's go to our next question. In what ways could your cultural needs be better reflected in your homes? I can start this off as you're thinking and typing, or if you want to speak. I know that one cultural need that we found on the coast is that homes sometimes are occupied by a lot of people for social gatherings, and sometimes not occupied by many people at all. So that makes two needs. One is a diversity of housing stock, which is why so many of the tiny homes, the small homes have come into the consciousness of coastal communities, the coastal First Nations communities wanting somewhere for a single person to live rather than a house with 4 bedrooms or 3 bedrooms on 2 floors for one person to live. And also having houses that are designed to meet, let's say, the family that lives there. So let's say a family of 5, but can accommodate guests when guests come to reserve or come back into town for a week or 2, or or for 6 months maybe if they're staying with you. So you need houses that are built to, you know, their HVAC systems and their space sleeping arrangements can, you know, sleep and maybe run efficiently with 5 people, but then also can run with 12 people in the home. So those are some of those are some of the ways that we've designed houses to better reflect coastal needs. And I'm curious if you can think in your community how your culture could be better reflected in your homes.
So Jan Hood's also responding to this question, saying that they've started discussions on building to suit multi-generational families. It's how we've lived in. It makes the most sense for us. It's not aligned with the idea of the only way to live is a nuclear family unit. Yeah, sorry, nuclear family unit.
That's great. Yeah, that's a great example. And I'll say another example is people are thinking creating outdoor food prep areas. So rather than, you know, there's a lot of boiling fish that goes on the coast, and rather than doing that in one's house, you can do it on a covered patio right outside the kitchen with a tap and a, you know, metal countertop that can have a propane jack for a propane stove or something. So there's just thinking about how to remove some of that moisture from inside the home associated with cultural lifestyle. Anyone else want to share one?
Yeah, someone also mentioned the same idea. If we know people hunt and fish, we need to build to accommodate that.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah, absolutely. Okay, not hanging a deer in the basement, but having an appropriate place outdoors.
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
Yep.
There's no more activity. I'll head to the next question. So what's currently working well with housing in your community? Things that you want to make sure you maintain as you change your homes.
Do you want to start with a couple examples, Jill, just in terms of things that came up during the development of the Coastal First Nations Guide?
Yeah, I would say that the peer-to-peer, the conversations peer-to-peer, where one community learns from another community, has been working well. So multiple communities in a similar zone supporting each other in housing. That's one thing. I think that in other communities, training staff who work in the housing department on energy efficiency to then be able to maintain, like the maintenance staff, have the ability to also perform energy efficiency upgrades has been positive in communities. And then those same staff can be trained as, you know, as they learn more about housing and the bigger picture, they can then receive blower door testing, so they can start to be part of the crew that holds contractors accountable. So building skills in a certain person or department to continue the journey around energy efficiency has worked well.
That's great. It sounds like a couple of suggestions here from folks on the line. Things like consistency, routine, and maintenance have been working well in one community. In another community, Gillian mentions that discussions have come up that idea of pit houses from the past and having families living together in the winter, so that a family house kind of accommodates that, and then smaller houses for families living apart in the warmer months.
Cool. And is Gillian from the Okanagan? Is that right?
Gillian is from, I believe, the Okanagan Similkameen.
Yeah, great.
Lower Similkameen. Actively listening to concerns and engaging in constructive communication about issues and challenges and barriers. I think that's working well.
Yeah, good. So that level of engagement with your community, always circling back, listening, incorporating, open dialogue. Good.
Yeah, and also we start conversation even before members become tenants of what our expectations are and what they can expect from us.
Right. again, I'm sure, I imagine that's supported by policy. So really having everything written down, orderly, understandable, and then working people through face-to-face to communicate some of those expectations. Good.
Yeah. Jolene's also indicating that renovation funding and retrofits. I guess I'm not sure if this is something that's working well or something that they're looking for more of, but did you want to?
Probably both.
Probably both. Yeah, you could expand on that if you wanted, Jolie. All right. There was one other question. I don't know if you're going to transition to the next one. I thought maybe we could address just in between here. I don't know if this fits or not, or where you want to deal with it, but I think someone was reflecting on your earlier point around HRVs and the challenges in remote areas, and wondering if you could, if any examples have come up on how to integrate passive ventilation without increasing energy costs.
Yeah, for sure. Can I ask who the question's coming from?
I think it's coming from someone who's joined us from Clean Nova Scotia. So not one of the communities, but another organization that's working on energy efficiency.
Okay, Clean Nova Scotia. Oh, hello, welcome. Across the country. Yeah, so Derek from Clean Nova Scotia. Great. Okay. Yeah, so our work in designing homes has incorporated passive ventilation in a few ways. One is helping air move through the home in different. So one is having windows on corners, so windows across the room on corners, so people can open, like teaching people about opening windows when there's moisture in the home, and then closing them, so not leaving them open all day, but just open and close to get some air in, not leaving them wide open all day, and then having space under doors. So I think someone who's more technical could help with the exact measurements, but let's say making the gap between the floor and the door maybe another 1/4 inch or 1/2 inch higher to allow air underneath. Some homes are putting windows or little sort of vents that can open and close on top of doors as well to help air move out of the room on top of the door. Also in closets, making holes in the back of a closet to have air move from out of a closet into the neighboring room through the back of the closet, when having slotted doors. So you remember in the 90s, all of the slotted closet doors that used to fold in and out. So making sure you have slotted doors where you can, even in bedrooms, having slotted doors to help air move through. Those are some of the ways that we've tried to encourage passive ventilation. Also help with some mechanical ventilation with some fans in bathrooms that turn on automatically depending on moisture, and hood fans and things like that are more with a point of moisture dealing with ventilation.
Mm-hmm. And when you're talking about spaces under doors, you're talking about interior doors, obviously. Yes, interior doors. Exterior doors should not have spaces under them. Just double check.
Maybe in your summer home in the Okanagan, that would be okay, but not. Maybe not, actually.
That would be rather cold in the winter. Jolene just expanded a bit on her comment before about what's working well, and saying that they've been getting renovation funding from CMHC and retrofits from Fortis, and our community members are very happy with that.
Great. I'm happy to hear that. Okay, I have another question. If there's no one else with their hand up, I'm wondering what your biggest challenges are for housing. I can imagine, based on my experience on the coast, and even some of the conversations that's come up already that people have offered solutions to, is having one type of building stock that everyone's expected to live in that doesn't match the cultural and climatic needs, mold and moisture in the homes, challenges around who gets homes, and as we get into energy efficient new housing, who gets the new homes and how are they allocated, all of that sort of inner politics of, that goes on reserve. These are some challenges we've seen. Knowing who to work with and who to trust, and costs and all of that as well has been a challenge. Go ahead, Jim.
Yeah, just one comment so far from Sasha Wiley-Shaw, must be him, I guess. Land availability and funding availability, the challenges she's or he has identified.
Thank you.
Sure.
Thank you, Sasha. Absolutely.
Jan's mentioned working in a partner-like relationship and collaborative approach with leadership around policy and procedure. That sounds like a very probably common issue. Diplomatic way of putting it, Jan.
Okay.
Well, I'm expecting more here, but I'm sure maybe the next question.
So, and these questions are also going to be in your exit survey. So if you are, maybe think about it, this is helpful. I'm not asking these questions just into the wind, but we're using the input from this. I'll be bringing it to the steering committee for the new provincial housing initiative later this week to start to discuss this and think about programming to support communities to resolve. So that leads to this next question, which is what tools would help you improve housing, either in your community or your region. And think of this in the context of we're listening to you because we are scoping tool development. So what do you think would be highly beneficial?
Well, we've got a few suggestions here. Financing, this probably sort of overlaps a little bit with the previous question as well. Financing CMHC, MUP contributions not keeping pace with construction costs. Member housing grant from INAC, way too low.
Yeah.
Julian's mentioned that biggest challenge are homeowners not performing their own maintenance and finding maintenance workers and project management for maintenance workers. Jan, I think, I'm not sure which community she's with, a more urban community. We don't have the land base, whereas in more remote communities, they have more abundance of land, but not as much skilled labor or tradespeople.
Yeah, so there's a kind of a trade-off. It's either if you're in a more, if I'm understanding, Jan, if you're in a more urban area, then you may have more access to skills, but not the land. And if you're in a more remote or rural area, then you have access to land, but maybe not the skills. Is that? That's what I took from that, which is true. Which is why sometimes partnerships, like in the coast, one thing we did that I didn't talk about in the Coastal First Nations Guide is at the end we have an appendix of, and you can see it there if you have it. I'm just going to flip to it. We have an appendix that says current resources available in GBI communities. GBI is short for Great Bear Initiative communities. So, you know, we've got some I'm just looking through here. We've got a mill and a kiln, so we can mill our own wood in 2 communities. In another community, we have a pool of local trades. In 2 other communities, we have examples of rooftop solar installations and some expertise around that. In other ones, we have cabinet makers. So if you look regionally, maybe you don't have it in your community, but maybe a neighboring community does have it. So how can you create a local economy with your neighbors to of course, you can't get land from your neighbors, but that is part of the benefit of peer network process or peer community process. Any other asks for new tools?
There's another suggestion here around technical support to educate tenants on where we want to go. The housing department's 1 person, so we got limited capacity to do this work. I was also going to mention, you know, we've got a number of different support organizations on the line here as well. It might be also useful, you know, your thoughts are also welcome if you've seen any kind of best practices in your work that you'd like to share, or tools or other things that you think would be helpful to highlight. Jolene's also flagged that tools to improve housing and building capacity, for example, skilled workers, better communication between office and community members becoming involved in solutions.
Okay. I'll say, just as I'm waiting to hear any others, that as part of the, as I said, we're launching a steering committee this week to start scoping this project, and we are envisioning, to be discussed with the steering committee, that we will also have a stakeholder group, or you can call them something else, or up to the first committee, what we call everyone, but a group of agencies that we want to engage with to explore partnerships. And we'll also put on the table what it may look like to involve other members of, not-for-profit or service organizations or industry. So we're starting with the First Nations leaders, and from there we'll be talking about how to engage other stakeholders in this project. So there will be room for, and we'll be actively seeking the expertise on this call and elsewhere in the province to try to get as far ahead as quickly as possible.
And Connie Davis from CMHC also mentioned that consultants at CMHC are able to assist in planning for housing strategies and development.
Great. Okay. So I guess this last is a selfish call for our stakeholder committee. If anyone has not yet, I have a list of folks who are interested, but it sounds like Gillian and Joanne and others. I know Leo has already volunteered his time on Thursday to start the conversation with us. But if any other representatives working for First Nations on housing initiatives want to be part of our committee, please be in touch with me. Here's my email address. Our first call is on Thursday at 1 o'clock. And the other service organizations or companies or folks who want to stay involved, you can also be in touch. And of course, information will be shared through the Fraser Basic Council group as well. So if you want to take more of a listening role, I'm sure there'll be some reporting out through this group as well.
That's great. There was just one other suggestion that came in just in between questions there from Gail Andrews at Lil Watt is housing strategy guideline tips and tools for an idea on how to start or plan and development. That's another idea.
Okay. I feel like that reminds me, I feel like it's a good time for a plug. There is a course that we've developed curriculum for, again, supported with funding from BC Hydro on energy efficiency for housing managers or housing administrators is the content. As some of you know, the content is available in a PDF format, but VIU will be offering an online course, and some of that, housing strategy tips and tools. How do you go about engaging your community? How do you it starts from what is energy efficiency and moves through how do you do an audit? How do you upgrade your homes? How do you work with maintenance crew? What are the tools? How do you communicate with your community? So it's a I don't know, Amy Seabrook is on the phone as well. I'm not sure if you remember if it's an 8-module or a 8-week course that we will be able to send participants, First Nation participants to. So if you're interested in taking this course in the new year through VIU, you could also be in touch. My email is there. We can shuffle you along to registration conversations.
Great, thanks for the plug. Yeah, I know we've heard of some people being interested in that as well. So if definitely be in touch if you're interested in that course. I believe there's some sort of a bit of a pilot that's being run, if that's correct. So now's a chance to get in early before it's becomes kind of their standard offering. Well, thanks very much, Jill. Appreciate your presentation and your kind of drawing information out of folks and engaging them in our webinar today. Hopefully you've gotten some useful information from everyone and input into what you're doing, and I imagine there'll be some people who are interested. You can also be in touch with myself, with Jim Vanderwall, or my colleague Alina. Our contact information is there if there's anything that you'd like assistance with in terms of energy efficiency and housing in your community, or linkages to any of these ongoing initiatives. So I appreciate your involvement and attention. We know it's kind of challenging. We're not in the same room, and so it's not quite as easy to share as it is when we're in person, but I appreciate your patience with the technology and being able to connect with people around BC on this important topic. So have a great afternoon, everyone.
If I could just say one more thing in closing, I'm just looking at the list of who's on the call. A lot of people on the call have been very active and supportive in initiatives around the province and in some of this work. And it just reminds me that just wanting to say in closing that it's an exciting time for the province, and there's alignment and commitment and moving forward. And I see so many of you working hard on this difficult, challenging topic and in this work, and I want to thank all of you for your efforts.
All right, thanks. We need to work on how we clap after presentations. We haven't figured that out yet for webinars, but
everyone just clap and everyone.
Everyone clap.
Thank you.
Thanks, everybody. Have a great day.